Wang, Mount Zhongnan. A looming presence near the capital. Cascades of mountains link it to the coast. Looking back, white clouds are closing in. Before me, nothing to see but heavy mist. The prospect changes near the central peak. Each valley freshly patterns light and shade. To sleep overnight in a stranger's home, I call to the woodsman over the river. So we continue with Wang Wei's pentasyllabic regulated poems. This poem, from the title, it states it quite clearly, is going to be a landscape and or a retired life type of poem. Mount Zhongnan, also called Taiji, it's not a mountain really, it's more of a mountain range. So I would say, I would have probably thought that the title should be more like the Zhongnan Mountains. So this is a mountain range that is, I think we've talked about it before. It's just to the south of the old capital Chang'an of the Tang Dynasty, and it's quite a long mountain range. So it was a preferred spot for Taoists or Buddhists or hermits who like to retire, but still being at, like a stone's throw from the capital area. It was an ideal place to have a retreat, and still be relatively close to the center of imperial power, which is the reason why Wang Wei had a retirement spot there. He also had relatively nearby his estates of the Wang River Valley, and relatively close to this area as well. So what we get here is a landscape poem. We get a description, if not in detail, because after all this is a Liu Xi, it's not a very long poem. Detailed descriptions generally of mountains, we've already encountered some, but they fit better into the freer pattern of the old style poetry, because you can, write down many lines, as many lines as you wish. Whereas here you only have 8. So we get a summary description of some sites in the mountain. Actually, you could say the poem is divided into 3 parts, which match most of the couplets. So the first couplet introduces the mountains. The middle couplets, which are the parallelistic ones, give us some views of what is seen in the mountains. And the last couplet seems to close the poem with the poet's retirement to sleep in a humble abode in the mountain or mountains he has been exploring. So as we said, the topic, landscape, and the retired life, the secluded life, up to a point. So Wang Wei used to make many small escapes in some of the free days he was allotted to go to these mountains and to enjoy this sort of relaxed life far away from the dust and grime of politics and the world. So as usual, let's explore the poem couplet by couplet. A looming presence near the capital. Cascades of mountains link it to the coast. So the first couplet describes the Zhongnan Mountains, and probably one of its highest peaks, which is the one here where maybe Wang Wei has a hut, or maybe not. He just might be enjoying some free range exploration of the mountain. So the first line is interesting. A looming presence near the capital. So it's high mountain, it looms over the capital. But I think the original line says something like Tai Chi near heaven, blah blah blah, probably a missing character. So you could read, Taiji is another name for the Zhongnan Mountains. So you could read this in a double way, I imagine, which is the Zhongnan Mountains rise up to the sky, because there you're interpreting the character sky, Tian, in the line literally. But you could also read it because heaven was used a lot of times in poetry as a nickname, a euphemism for the emperor or for the imperial capital. or the court. So the second meaning, which is the one that has been explicitly rendered in this poem, is the Zhongnan mountains are close to the emperor, therefore are close to the imperial city, are close to the capital. In fact, this poem has tried to merge both by the use of the adjective looming at the beginning. It's trying to say both things, that the mountains are high and that they're close to the capital. Cascades of mountains link it to the coast. It's not just one lone mountain, it's a mountain chain. I'm not sure it reaches the sea. I fear Wang Wei is being a bit hyperbolic here, but the range does extend considerably to the east, but probably not as far east as the sea. But anyway, it's a majestic image of the mountains extending, to the eastern sea, or perhaps the coast. Well, the coast is probably the sea coast, probably not the river margin, but anyway. It gives us a vertical, this couplet is describing the Zhongnan mountains, and it gives us vertical images of extension and horizontal images of extension. So now we continue with the central couplets, which are always the parallelistic ones, as you will remember. Looking back, white clouds are closing in. Before me, nothing to see but heavy mist. So there is a jump in the narration. The first couplet was describing us the general frame and extension of the mountains. In the second couplet, the poetic persona has somehow jumped into the mountain. So we'll probably have to flash forward. The poetic persona is climbing the mountain, is in the middle of climbing it when he sees these images, when he experiences these thoughts. So the main idea in the couplet is the lack of visibility, even though mountains generally allow for extended views and insight. In this particular mountain, we cannot see further on. We're still midway, probably. So in front of us, there's heavy mist. So everything, it becomes even dangerous, I imagine. You have to walk with care and to check very well where you're putting your feet so as not to fall. Behind him, there's also clouds. So, white clouds are closing in. So the mountain is probably quite high. Yeah? So we have this image of the solitary climber and poet surrounded by mist, as in a vacuum or as in an empty space of white. Third couplet. So the poet continues climbing. In the third couplet, he has reached the top. The prospect changes near the central peak. Each valley freshly patterns light and shade. So finally, in the third couplet, the poetic persona reaches close to the top, and now he gets the expanded view. He gets a massive view, probably, of the whole area of the land within the passes. The clouds and the mists have diffuminated or are further down. But the main thing that is described, the main thing that is seen is a checkered pattern, if you wish, of black and white over the valleys that lie below from this peak. There are lots of valleys. Depending on their position, they are more in the shade of the mountains or more exposed to the brilliant sunlight. So this checkered black and white chessboard mountain pattern is one of the delightful views, probably the main delightful view that Wang Wei's gaze falls upon when he reaches almost the top of his climb. Finally, the last couplet, and the last couplet also includes a chronological jump up to a point. The climb has taken a lot of time, we might imagine. It's now nearing night, and the poet has to be a little bit practical and has to find a place at which to sleep. And we might imagine there won't be many close to the top of this mountain range. To sleep overnight in a stranger's home, I call to the woodsman over the river. So probably the poet has climbed at least partially down the mountain range. It's probably getting late, and the poet is not going to arrive to any of his own abodes. I'm not sure even if he planned on that, but he decides to improvise, to sleep in a stranger's house, even if it's a poor cottage, no problem. Just a place to spend the night. So he sees a woodsman beyond the river, and he calls him who's going to ask him for permission to sleep in his rural hut. So the poem ends with this rustic note. Not only have we been climbing mountains, but the poet is attempting to, and will probably manage, to spend the night at a rural person's house, at a peasant or wood-gatherer's house. So the simple life, yeah. Even though he is an aristocrat, even though he occupies important court positions, Wang Wei is completely unencumbered by his posts and positions. He is perfectly happy to dwell in a poor hut and enjoy the retired life of the mountains. Yeah, so this strikes, this is probably, Chinese poetry. It's very biographical, so this is probably relating an anecdote that happened as it is being described in this poem. Still, we should take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because here, as everywhere, this playing at being, at living the life of a hermit or of a peasant is always a little bit of a play for the aristocrats and the poets. This is a tradition. I've talked about this in previous poems. There's a tradition of the pastoral in Western literature and in other literatures. This idea of the rich and aristocratic families, that they're tired of the world, its corruption, its intrigues, and that they would really relish a simulacrum of the life of the farmers of the countryside. You have plays by Shakespeare that reflect this sort of literary view of the world, or this fantasy of the rich, of being able to transfer to a rural area that is uncorrupt, that is pure, that is free from intrigues and the negative aspects of civilization and courtly life. As You Like It by Shakespeare is the best play that represents this, I think. But, even if the Chinese did take it seriously, we know that Wang Wei left others left positions at court and had estates that were, very austere and rural in the mountains. They don't become peasants. They're still aristocrats playing at living the retired life, which also in these poems, as we've commented, is not just an aesthetic question, it's also a religious question, as the retired life in mountains was associated with Taoistic and Buddhist beliefs, and we know that Wang Wei was quite a strong Buddhist believer. In fact, his nickname, Chinese traditionally invent a nickname for themselves. His nickname was related to a religious figure, Vimalakirti, a lay Buddhist hero. So, and he was a Buddhist practitioner, especially in his late years, of Chan Buddhism. So, very interesting reflection, very interesting portrait, painting of a nice landscape and of the retired life in the line of Wang Wei's typical style.